The impudence, the audacity, the unmitigated gall of those knuckleheads of liberty podcasters, daring to voice opinions outside the mainstream of accepted thought. Listen if you dare. It's angry, it's funny, it's even sometimes sad, but it's always based on freedom and justice, as you will see. Here's our host, Jason McPhee.
Welcome to the Knuckleheads of Liberty. We're coming at you on September 7, 2022. And boy, I tell you, it always seems to be bad news nowadays with the economy and just about every other choice that's being taken away from us in society. But we're going to spend most of this episode talking about school choice and issues in schools that are in the news right now. And so hopefully, we'll get a little bit of either good news or some inspiration and maybe hear about some sort of terrible things are going on out there too. But before we get into any of that, let me introduce you to our panel. In our upper left-hand corner, we have Leon, the word Brathwaite, last word in Liberty. He is a retired engineer in the state of California. Our Screaming Eagle of Freedom, Tim, is out today, but he should be back next week, hopefully. And we have a special guest today, Mike McShane from EdChoice, and they are an organization that promotes school choice out there and helping people advocate for that. And he's going to join us today and talking about some of these educational related news topics. So before we get into, or as we get into any of that, let's talk about what's front and center. Gosh, student loan debt cancellation. So maybe we can bring up the visual on that one, James. So we have the Biden administration. We talked about this just a little bit recently on one of our shows. But boy, I tell you, just throwing all of this money at a program that apparently is such a failure that you're giving all this money to a system where people either can't decide they can't or won't pay back the loans. And somehow the solution to that is to throw more money at it.
Talk about subsidizing irresponsibility, but it's okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. So anyways, I tell you, it's just more and more money for miseducation. What do you guys think about this?
I will let our guest Mike go first on this.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it seems like a pretty transparent political play, right? It seems like the Democrats in general are seeing this kind of young, college-educated cadre of people as their base now. These are the folks that they are appealing to, and so this is a way to just directly give them money. And so it's, in some ways, and who knows, this may be much ado about nothing, because I think, having heard, I think it was at least Nancy Pelosi before and others say that the president can't do this, and then to suddenly change their tune on it. So it's possible that this will be much ado about nothing, and that the courts will say that it's not, he can't do it. And I'm not a lawyer, but it seems like almost every explanation that I've seen of this, I have found wanting, like where the actual authority to do this comes from, et cetera. It seems pretty tenuous. So it could end up being much ado about nothing. But to me, I just see it as a more transparent. It's just like trying to give a giveaway before some midterm elections to a constituency that they want to cement.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that this is a whole vote buying program by the Democrats. They're trying to use our dollars, taxpayer dollars, to buy votes for the midterm, without a doubt. And probably, I hope the courts will find it unconstitutional. But the whole problem about this thing is the horror of it. So there are parents like myself and my wife who sent our kids to college, who had loans, paid them off, and now Joe Biden and company is telling us that you must now pay taxes to subsidize the irresponsibility of other people, the students and the parents. This is unbelievable. So if I and my wife could educate our children, why the hell can anybody else?
Yeah.
Well, no, and Leon, I think there's actually an interesting point here too, which is, so on one level, it's subsidizing irresponsibility of people who took out loans and couldn't pay them back. To me, there's also this interesting level of you're subsidizing people who are quite comfortably paying their loans back, right?
Yes.
There are lots of people who took out student loans, went to college or went to graduate school or got a law degree or an MBA, a medical degree. So lots of the people that have just as a statistical reality, a lot of the people who have the largest student loan debt are doctors and lawyers. They're making great money. They're paying their loans back. It's actually not that big of a deal. And we're giving them money, right? So,
Yes.
so not only are we subsidizing people who probably shouldn't have taken out loans and are not paying for it, but we're subsidizing people who are quite comfortably paying their loans, paying money into an investment that clearly paid off for them, right? Like if you go to law school and you become a successful lawyer, whatever you spent to go to law school was an investment worth making. It's just an investment that you made in yourself. And we're just giving folks 10 grand. I mean, it's like giving 10 grand off people's mortgages or off something else. Say, wait, this is an asset that's actually appreciating in value, and we're just going to give you money for some reason. So it's even on that level, it doesn't make sense.
And that's a good point, because one of the requirements of this whole loan forgiveness, as they call it, if people up to 125 annual income of up to $125,000. I mean, that's serious money when you think about it. So that's a very good point you just made.
And if you're married, it's $250.
$250,
so
exactly.
So you could have, if only one person's working, you could have somebody making $249,000 a year, somebody staying home, and they just got 10 grand.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's well above the median and average household incomes they're willing to forgive for. But and it's not just that too. Apparently, there's other crazy student loan programs as well. Daily Wire had this one out recently where apparently under one of these student loan forgiveness programs, they allow for people who are public employees to also forgive a lot of money as well. And in one case, they show a teacher who was able to write off $450,000. And I can't imagine anybody taking out that kind of money for a teaching credential.
Wait, how long were they in school?
Was there limousine service in this school?
Yes. How many Hawaiian vacations were taken on with that money?
Yeah. But it is interesting though, as far as ways to think about these student loan programs. I mean, I remember Milton Friedman, who was, I guess part of the impetus for your Ed Choice group. But one of his ideas was tie the fate of the school and the student together. So the idea is, through a market mechanism, that would just be, hey, a school has to be attractive enough to warrant getting a loan for. But in his mind, he was thinking somehow maybe the school invests in the student and they get a return on that student over the lifetime. But at least that's one of the discussions I heard from him at one point. But either way, the idea is that suddenly you incentivize the school to have the same incentives as the student then, and that they will be successful in the future and that there will be a return on investment.
Schools have to have some skin in the game here.
Yeah,
I mean, one of these things that's really interesting that I think a lot of people don't necessarily know about. So if we think about federal support for young people to attend college, and frankly, it's not even all young people anymore, but you have what we're talking about here, which are federally subsidized loans, but there's also Pell Grants, which are just grants. You don't have to pay them back, but for low-income students to attend college. And while we can debate, I think there's actually a pretty strong argument to be made of helping low-income kids who are able to go to college and are capable and will thrive with it. It's like a no-brainer investment. I think it's not a bad idea at all. But where it gets interesting is that students can get like 4 years of Pell Grants. They can get 4 years of Stafford loans or any of these different subsidized loans, and they cannot graduate. So if you think about it from a school's perspective, they can enroll a student and continue to cash those federal dollars, some of them that students won't have to pay back and some of them that they will, for 4 years. And I don't remember off the top of my head, I think Stafford's are maybe $7,500 now and Pell's maybe $5,500, may have gone up from that. But you're basically getting like 12 grand a year for 4 years. And the student could leave with nothing to show for it, like nothing to show for it at all. And the school just gets to pocket that money. So I think saying, listen, universities, if you have students that you admit and you take federal dollars and for them and they don't graduate, you have to pay some of that back. You have to have some skin in the game, because it will say, okay, hey, wait a second. we're now only going to admit people that we are confident will meet the standards to graduate. And if we fail at doing our job, we'll have a strong incentive to do our job well, because we are going to be on the hook for some portion of that, some portion of their loan, some portion of their Pell Grants, if they don't graduate. I think and graduate with sort of the skills that they need to succeed. But I think tied into the word you use, Jason, which is the right one, which is incentives. We have to think, what incentives do these programs create right now? And how can we realign those incentives to sort of advance student welfare and not the sort of, just more largesse for these massive institutions?
Well, and even just the offerings. I mean, the idea that they're incentivized to offer things that just don't really have any rate of return over the long run, like ideas of how many people are being turned out now with degrees and maybe
gender
some
studies in gender studies.
Some kind of social science where there's massively more degrees than there is a demand in the market for.
But this is really a good point, though. This is a really good point in terms of turning students out who have degrees that have value in the marketplace. Because yes, we have a lot of people coming out of schools right now. They have degrees in gender studies. They have degrees in Asian studies and African American studies. All these sort of things that have zero to little value in the marketplace. So the university, and you guys are absolutely right, the university have no skin in the game beyond the fact that they hand them this worthless piece of paper. They go into the marketplace and they can't find that $100,000 job that they had in their little minds, in their uneducated minds. So the university have no skin in the game once the person leaves their campus. And this is where I think a major change in the way the universities operate can occur and should occur.
Yeah. Well, at the very least, just make them market oriented. So that the idea that if you have the discipline of having to actually get a real loan instead of just free government money,
totally. Look, and part of it too.
No, but if you're tied the university to it, honestly, I think it should be enough to incentivize them to do a better job of educating the students that walk through their doors.
I'll tell you, if you love that idea. No, I'm just going to tell you, if you love that idea, I got a second one for you. No, I think another thing that's key in this too, tied into exactly what both of you were just talking about, is we need to arm prospective students with better information about the very things that you were talking about. Yeah. Students might go looking at the University of California system, et cetera. You've got all of these different campuses. You have all of these different majors, and trying to decide which one. Let's say you want to be an electrical engineer. What is the best electrical engineering program? What is the one that's going to lead to the best labor market outcomes for me? We don't know. There's some kind of goofy rankings that people will do, but you don't know what that's necessarily tied into or having any sort of understanding of those things. Yeah. And so as a result, it could be that going to maybe like a second tier school, they're what we think of as a second tier school. They have individual departments that are doing an awesome job placing people into jobs. And so we have this completely distorted market because there's really terrible information. I mean, it's sort of basic, a fundamental kind of markets 101 is that market failures happen when there are information asymmetries. If one participant in the market knows a lot more than the other participant in the market does, you can see people taking advantage of that, or arbitraging it and sort of exploiting it, depending on how you want to look at it. Yes. So arming families, arming students with better data on the outcomes of majors. And there are lots of ways to do this. There are people that have tried to do this. There's it wasn't the Texas Public Policy Center, but there's another group, I think, out of Texas, a kind of free market group there, Free Op, or one of those groups tried to do this, linking different results, tax records or others, to try and figure out these various things. But I think that's another part of this, is we got to give people better information about their choices so that they know when they're going into it, or at least have a better idea going into it, which types of majors and which campuses are putting them in the best situation to succeed in the labor market.
Indeed.
And that's always the thing, when you can let prices speak, there's so much information that comes through. I mean, you mentioned markets, and boy, I tell you, it's just time after time we see government killing those market signals. So we just have less information. But it's funny, as a segue to you mentioned California, and I'm just going to jump topics here real quick because the segue is a little bit better. But maybe we can get this story up. So California State recently wound up changing their admissions criteria, and they used to try to be a little more objective in having these SAT scores as part of the way of measuring students' capabilities as they're coming through the doors. And now they've gone away from that because of social justice. They've decided that these metrics just aren't the correct metrics, although they have yet to define what the correct metrics are. And they've just sort of tossed them aside. And so, not only are we not letting market prices speak, but any information that was available, like just test scores, apparently we've got to kill those now too. What do you guys think about this? I just think it's awful.
But one thing you said, Jason, that I'm not sure is correct. You said they haven't yet defined the metric. They have defined the metric. Okay, the metric that they're using now is skin color. That's what they want. They want to have this quote unquote diverse campus. Yeah. So that diverse campus means, we must have a certain percent of blacks, we must have a certain percent of whites, and a percent of Asians. If we don't have that, then something is wrong with the functioning of the campus, which is unbelievable to me. Okay. Yeah. So these people are doing nothing but creating indoctrination centers in our universities. Well, it starts in K through 12. But what they're doing right now is at the university level, and certainly here in California, is these indoctrination centers where they're teaching people nothing but a bunch of social justice garbage that is getting us nowhere and will get those students nowhere. And all of these loan issues that we're having right now is because of this damn nonsense. They're trying to supposedly educate these people on all the social justice crap. It have no value in the marketplace. And then what happened? We as taxpayers have to pay for the damn nonsense. This is what's going on.
Well, and Leon, certainly there's an underlying metric, the social justice metric. But what I meant is that they said they were going to come up with a new metric that more appropriately gauges students, and of course they didn't have it. But they said this metric we know is not good because, as you said, they were kind of looking at skin color as it came through, and they said, "Hey, this just isn't what we want."
Yeah, so, I will bet you everything I have when they come up with this new metric. It will include diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'll bet you that.
I think it's probably a pretty solid bet there. Look, I think research is starting to emerge, I think, on this question. It's not my exact area of research, so I may bottle it. But so there have been these schools that have been moving towards quote unquote test optional. So this belief that by using standardized test scores, that they're for any number of reasons, social justice or otherwise, that schools shouldn't be using that for their admissions decisions, and that ultimately that will lead to a more diverse, socioeconomically, racially, et cetera. It's the ACT and the SAT that are preventing us from having the ideal student body that we want. And to be perfectly honest with you, I think the research that's emerging on this is that when you go test to optional, it doesn't help on any of those metrics because, as it turns out, the SAT, the ACT are in many ways often the only tool that a poor student has to demonstrate that they are worthy of an elite institution. Right. They don't necessarily go to a good school. They don't, they might not have access to the clubs. They might not have had a lot of the instruction that they've needed in other areas because their schools aren't any good. But they can sit for the ACT or the SAT and show, hey, like I haven't had the opportunity to go to good schools, but I'm smart. You should take a chance on me. And unfortunately, when you get rid of that, and it's sort of what, somebody said, what portfolio you can put together of your work, obviously richer families that have more time that can devote to these things, people who can hire tutors and editors and all of these consultants and all these people who can help you put together your best portfolio to show holistically what type of student you are. That's going to obviously massively advantage those families. So I think that, and we're seeing this, in high school, in selective high schools that are happening across the country, the same deal. Well, we need to get rid of these entrance exams. Well, so many poor kids, it's their one chance to demonstrate that they are, that they'll thrive in these types of schools. So I think not only for so many of the reasons that Leon just talked about, but I think even on its face, like if you take these folks at their word that they want to have more low income students, they want to have more, diversity across any sort of metric that you have, ACTs and SATs are like the way to actually do that fairly. But it seems to me they want a system that actually isn't fair, that they have their ideal picture in their mind of what students that they want, and then they'll back out the metrics that they need to get them that.
Yeah.
But one of the things that these administrators of on the universities, they always claim is that, that is becoming a new thing now, is that these test scores, these are ACTs and SATs, there's racial and ethnic bias embedded in them. So I always wonder, and nobody will ever answer me this question: how could a math test be racially or ethnic bias? Okay, I mean, think about it. Calculus or algebra, it's universal. It's a universal language. Every language, every culture, every background. Math is the same,
Yeah.
and yet there's ethnic these things.
And Leon, to highlight what you're saying as well, that the foreign students, the students who come into California from out of the country, would have to be the most culturally disadvantaged, right? Because they're not even coming from this country, and they're smashing, the scores compared to our domestic students, in, in math. So it really underscores the thing. But we are kind of a little pressed on time, so I want to get on to the next one because I did promise some good news, and one of those good news items is the fact that in Florida, the parents have sort of rebelled against the offerings of the current public schools, and they've thrown out a lot of the school board. The people who were incumbents on those school boards. So now this doesn't necessarily mean school choice, but it certainly is people trying to exercise getting rid of some of the bad choices, I guess, that they were being offered. What do you guys have to think about that?
Well, look, Florida has been, since back in the days of Jeb Bush, Florida has really been, I think, at the forefront of advocating for school choice. Lots of charter schools, lots of private school choice. The Florida Tax Credit Scholarship now, I think, has more than 120,000 students that participate in it. The Miami Public School District, I think the last time I checked, the students living within the boundaries of that district, something like 60 or 70% of them attend schools of choice. So that's either within the school district or via charter schools or private school choice or others that are there. And so I think this sort of stuff shouldn't surprise us anymore, that when you see more and more examples of schools working outside of the system or working parallel to the system, meeting with success, you see people saying, hey, wait a second, why can't our schools do that? Like, what's getting in the way of those things? Wait, these charter schools seem to be doing great and kids are going to them, and these private schools are great and kids are going to them. And, the Miami School District on some of the, we were talking about the NAEP earlier, National Assessment for Educational Progress. They do some city-based ones of that, and Miami consistently performs really well in that, So I think lots of folks are looking to these other places and saying, wait, they're meeting with success. We got to start doing something different, which again, look, as someone who supports school choice, this is one of the sort of macro arguments that we make about school choice, is that it will exert competitive pressure on traditional public schools, that folks will see other people doing things differently and they will change their behavior. So this could be just an example of that, of saying, listen, we want our schools to operate more like these other schools that we're seeing do better. And this is the sort of democratic response to that.
And I think you're so right. I just want the public schools to become a choice, not their choice. That we are forced through zip code tyranny to choose the public schools. But the thing about this thing, though, and I think this is probably one of the, and Mike, you're absolutely right. In terms of Florida, it goes back to the Jeb Bush era when he was governor. But I think the pandemic had one good thing. Okay, I think it woke up parents to some extent. And not only in Florida, right? I see in Virginia, we're seeing a lot of this going on right now. The governor there is trying to push school choice a little further along. I think West Virginia, we have some action going on there too. So I think the pandemic have woke up parents a little bit, and I think we might move in a better direction. Now, we don't have much hope here in California. Honestly, I don't see it. I know there are some programs around the state, and a few programs around the state, and then of course the wealthy parents tend to have the choice; they can move to good districts. But in the urban centers of America in general, we don't have school choice. I mean, not as much as we would like, I should say. But the pandemic did produce, to me, one good thing is that parents have woken up a bit, and they're seeing what their kids are being taught in schools, and hopefully we'll see more of this sort of things that is happening in Florida right now.
Yeah. No, it's definitely some. This is great that we aren't all under one federal system, because aside from school competition, we also have state competition. That Florida is showing us that we don't all have to do it like California.
Exactly.
It's wonderful. So, well, speaking of some, I guess, interesting directions that different school districts are going. This brings us back to COVID and some of the choices that are being made in different places. Maybe we could get the visual up on this one. So recently, schools have started back in session in the United States over the last few weeks, and in Washington, D.C., most places have made the decision now that, hey, look, COVID policy was really damaging to students' education, locking kids down, sending them into these remote programs where they really haven't, weren't tried at all, but just, no choice. You're just sort of forced into these things. And in DC, apparently hasn't learned that lesson yet, even though everybody else seems to be getting it, because they have still have policies around COVID where they are going to lock kids out if they aren't vaccinated. And now they apparently this story oversold it a little bit, because it's not going to happen just at the beginning of the school year, but apparently by January, if these kids are not vaccinated, be able to attend in-person public school in Washington, D.C. So again, no school choice program there, really, so to speak of. And then the one choice you're left with is telling you, hey, we're not even going to give you an education if you don't do everything we tell you to do. What do you guys think about that?
Well, you look at this thing, and you're seeing the Democrats and the teachers unions at work again. I mean, they locked down the school because of COVID. They told us, okay, we got through the whole pandemic. We realized that kids are the least vulnerable. I mean, kids, I guess, under 18 are the least vulnerable to the COVID virus. And still we have these people like the mayor of DC and company, and the teachers unions involved here somewhere. Still, they think kids should be wearing their mask, the kids should be vaccinated before they come back to school. What nonsense is this? Or the next generation is in trouble here, and these people are not helping at all.
Yeah, that's the thing that got me about it too. As we saw in that thing, is that they're saying they won't offer a virtual option. So
right.
To me, it's just, number one, it's like, this is a 5-alarm fire. Everybody needs to be back at school. Open schools, get every kid in the schools. We have to do that. They've lost 2 years of education. Open the schools, get kids back in schools. So right now, to me, anybody in America who is taking something on the other side of that, I'm like, I have no time for you. Open the schools, get kids back in schools. But to me, when I see that, like, and we're not going to offer virtual, to me, it just strikes me as nothing but a sort of punitive thing. Like, right. We're going to do this because we don't like people who aren't vaccinated, or we don't think we have a sort of ideological commitment to this thing happening. And you have to do this, or we will essentially lock you out of a public education, which is, again, at this stage Leon, exactly what you brought, at this stage in the pandemic, for that particular population of people, all of those things, like, I do not think that is a justifiable course of action. Like, these aren't people working in a nursing home. These aren't people these aren't people working in an emergency room. Like, these are children, 12-year-olds in school. They need to be in school, and whether or not they get vaccinated to COVID or not should not be standing in their way of whether they can get a public education.
And to drive home the point, kids are the least vulnerable to the virus.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, and it all seems to flow down from the top nowadays on a lot of this stuff too. This being DC, well, our federal policy as well, on a lot of this COVID nonsense has been highly directed by the teachers unions. And let me get you to our last topic, which is our Knucklehead Noise Patrol, and that's where we try and talk about something that's just a little bit crazy that some public official has said recently, or somebody in the media. And in this case, James, maybe we could get the visual up for this. We're talking about the White House press secretary, Karine Jean. Karine Jean-Pierre. So, I got to give her like some kind of I call it KJP, maybe.
I think you just had a Biden moment there, Jason.
I think I did too. Not good. But so apparently she was asked a question recently about how COVID policy has affected so many of these kids in a recent White House press discussion. And what the reporter asked says, what is the administration going to do about this severe learning loss? And does the administration shoulder any blame for not pushing schools to reopen? And so her response was, let's step back to where we were not too long ago when this president walked into this administration, how mismanaged the response to the pandemic was. In under 6 months, schools in the nation went from being about 46% open to nearly all of them being open. That was the work of this president. And that was the work of Democrats, in spite of Republicans not voting for the American Rescue Plan, which $130 billion went to schools that have the ventilation to be able to have tutoring and the teachers and be able to hire more teachers. It just sounded like a word salad jumble at the end there. I don't know. But I mean, my God, it's like their denialism. It came out during all this that literally the CDC direction was being steered by the National Teachers Union in this country. I can't remember the exact name of the teachers union, but
is the one that Randy got?
AFT, Federation of Teachers. Yeah. So, but it just, it's beyond belief. I mean, you listen to them and they're talking about, hey, it was all about ventilation. It was all about, my God, we lost several years of schooling. They're trying to gaslight us to blame Republicans on all of this. And it's just amazing. And, gosh, amazing.
Yes, this idea that all these schools were just dying to be open. All of these folks, it was as if it was just, and it was not until President Biden arrived that they felt, I mean, it's a crazy assertion to make, to look at places that stayed closed, for extended periods of time, even after teachers had been vaccinated, even after sort of multiple waves of things. That's me. Look, and we may disagree on this. We've been agreeing a lot on this podcast. I always like to at least say something contrary. Listen, in March, April, May of 2020, like, I get it. We didn't know what the heck was going on. We didn't know how this was spreading. We didn't know who was the most effective. We didn't know anything. So for schools being closed down and things, I get it. Now, I totally understand lots of other private schools and others found ways to be open quicker than that and whatever. But let's just set that aside. Again, trying to be charitable to people. I get that. Then schools had an entire summer and billions of dollars in federal COVID aid that had already showed up to get ready for fall, to do something, to figure out some way to open. And lots of them did. But as was brought up in a lot of big cities and others and places where teachers unions were more powerful, they didn't. They stayed closed for that whole year. Teachers start getting vaccinated in February, March, April. Still, they stay closed. Then, you have another summer to get ready. And there were schools that still wanted to be closed after that, after teachers had been vaccinated for months, after, I think the older children had been eligible for, so it was just an absolutely insane thing to have happen. And for us to look back on any of those things as saying that was not acceptable, that yes, we'll grant you grace for the few months at the beginning, but having multiple summers and vaccinations, all of these things coming down the pipe for you, it's just not okay. And to say that, to say that the Democrats or to say that the teachers unions or to say that the Biden administration did anything to make that situation better is just revisionist history.
Mike, I mean, what you said wasn't too controversial. We might disagree a little bit on how much grace period we could have given them once they close the schools down. I mean, philosophically, I would not have agreed with the close down, but I would have given them some grace period because, like you said, you're right. We didn't know what the virus was doing. We didn't know about the severity. We didn't know nothing about those things. So we needed a little bit of time to kind of figure that out. So fine. I would be willing to give them, even though it goes against my principles, but I would have given them the grace period. But you're absolutely right in what you said, that after we had information, we knew about who is most vulnerable. We knew all those things. The vaccination programs were already in place, and still Randy Gardner and the teachers unions were still telling the Democrats the school had to remain closed. You see that Randy Gardner or Wine Gardner, or whatever the hell her name is? She's one of the most despicable human beings we have in America today. Okay, she is destroying generations of kids in this country right now. That is what she's doing, all in the name of protecting her members. Okay, they don't care about the education of our children. They care about their political friends. That's what they care about. So I totally agree with what you have just said. We may disagree a little bit about the grade, but I totally accept espouse.
Freezing up a little bit, Leon, but it seems to me the key takeaway on all of this is, imagine how much different things could have been with choice. I mean, if we had choice going into COVID, we would have had experiment going on. You would have had a lot more schools that, just approached it in different ways. I mean, that's the whole point of competition, right? We would have had just this great experiment going on, and some schools would have gone the whole lockdown method and shown us whether that was right or wrong, and some schools would have found other creative ways to give parents what they were looking for. But unfortunately, it was one size fits all for almost everybody, and that size just wound up debilitating a whole generation of kids by about a year or two's worth of education. So but anyways, that's about all the time we have for our show today. I want to thank you, Mike, for joining us on this. Do you have any last words you want to say about your organization or any message you want to leave the audience with?
Well, just thanks so much for having us. I think it's scrolling across the bottom now, but you can always check out www.edchoice.org to see everything we're up to.
Oh, awesome. And of course, Mike's organization will help you to, if you're trying to organize for school choice in your area, go see them. They'll definitely give you a hand on that. So thanks so much. And until the next one, stay free.
Yes, indeed. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, always and forever.
Thank you for listening to the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast. Find us on Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, your favorite podcast network, and at knuckleheadsofliberty.com.